understand that you grew up in King's Cross.
Yes, from about the time I was 7 until about 16. I lived in the Cross and went to school.
And what years were they?
Well, 1927 to 1936.
Right.
So most of my school life was there.
What brought you to the Cross?
Oh, well, we were in boarding school for a couple of years, and then Mother had to take us out of boarding school, and I think that she thought it was the easiest place to get to work. She could get into town. She worked midday mostly, so that she could be home for us. And it was easy to get to town. It didn't take very long. People used to say, "Why don't you go out in the suburbs? What do you live at the Cross for?" And she'd say, "Well, you know, the girls are safer at the Cross because it's well policed and I can be there quickly, and I'm mostly home when they're home from school." You know, so she worked her hours around our school hours so that she could be with us as much as possible.
And where did you live before that?
Bondi.
Oh, right. And
my sister started school at Bondi, but I hadn't started then when we left there.
And when people queried your mother choosing to live in the Cross, was that because it didn't have a good reputation?
Oh, people thought it was a terrible place, and the family, if it had, the address was the address wasn't actually King's Cross, everybody called it the Cross, but the address was William Street, because the post office was in William Street. But now it's Potts Point. And if my mother's family had known we lived in Potts Point, they would have been as happy as Larry. But to think, they were horrified when they knew she lived in King's Cross, because they were all South Australians.
Right.
And they thought the Cross was a terrible place.
And why was that? Like, in what way was it terrible?
I think it was very cosmopolitan. People loved the Cross because anybody from overseas always came to the Cross. It seemed to be their ambition to get to the Cross and see, you know, what it was like. And things were open. You know, shops are open now at night, but at the Cross in those days, you could get food at any time of the day or night. All the delicatessen shops were open, the fruit shops were open. It was sort of, you know, just went on continuous. And you didn't get that in any other place, not suburban. Shops weren't open in the suburbs after, 5, something like that.
Was there an overt sex industry there then? Did that contribute to its reputation?
I don't quite know what you mean by that.
Oh, you know now up in King's Cross,
like,
you've got all those
like girls and all that. No,
yeah.
No, there were girls on the street. But as I say, it was very well policed. The police patrol cars went through the Cross all the time, and nobody bothered you. One of the main things I remember, like when we were young, everybody went out at night after tea in the summertime. Everybody went walking down the shops or down Macleay Street, and it was such a beautiful place. And we were walking down, mother and 2 daughters walking down there one night, and a gentleman and his friend came up, and he raised his hat to the woman with her daughters. That was what I remember mostly about the Cross. People were civilised.
My understanding was that in the those very early times, or even say, or pre the Second World War, that the prostitutes and people mostly worked in brothels, and that wasn't. It was cosmopolitan, but it didn't have the reputation, the seedy reputation that it now has.
No, it was kept. Well, you might as well say it was kept undercover. I mean, we didn't know anything about it. Children didn't know anything about that in those days. And people went about their own business and doing their own things. And a lot of people lived there because there were a lot of residentials at that time. Could we stop for just a sec?
Were there interesting shops to look at? What sort of shops were along there?
There were dress shops, very fashionable dress shops. Lots of fruit shops. When you walked through the Cross, you could smell the fruit. You don't get that in fruit shops these days. And they were mostly Italians who ran the fruit shops, and they knew their fruit, and they kept restocking it and polishing it and looking after it. And Harry's fruit stall, somebody mentioned it in that red book as Harry's Barra, but it wasn't Harry's Barra, it was Harry's fruit stall, and it was in between two buildings, and the Arabian Coffee Shop was just near there, and we lived above the Arabian Coffee Shop at one time. And my mother, having to work all the time, she got a lot of pleasure out of looking at the passers-by, and we could see the people in the coffee shop, and it was open air, which was unusual in those days. It was behind the shop, but the house that it was built in front of was a terrace house, so that was part of the garden, the original garden of the house, and it was open air, but it was closed off to the street, but we could see it from our balcony windows.
Oh, that must have been really interesting.
I loved their use at the Cross. It was really lovely. We knew there was a razor gang there at the time, very active. They didn't interfere with anybody else. See, today you can't walk down the street, you're frightened somebody's going to attack you. But you could walk around the Cross and be perfectly safe, because the razor gang, you knew the streets not to go in. You were told never go down those streets, because that was where the razor gang lived.
Well, name those streets?
One was Craig End Street, in behind where King's Cross Road, where the new road goes through the Cross. I don't think it's there now. I think that's probably been taken down. And then another place was Eaton Avenue. It was very new. It was just built, and it was an avenue between Roslyn Street and a street at the back which I've forgotten. And they built these blocks of units in there, flats they called them then. There were about 8 or 10 flats on either side of this avenue through, and it was Eaton Avenue, and it was a very new complex, different idea altogether. And the razor gang got in there. We were living in a nice little flat down in Roslyn Street at the time, and Mum packed up and went. That's why we moved into so many different places. If Mother didn't like anybody living in the place or the flats, or she saw somebody going up and down the stairs, or that she didn't like the look of, she'd pack up and go out and look for something else, and away we'd go, because she had to have us safe. She had to have that peace of mind when she went to work, that we were safe.
And what did you know about the activities of the razor gangs?
Just that Mum, we weren't allowed to read the truth or anything, but Mum read the truth, and she knew what was going on. She read the Herald from back to front. She always knew what was going on everywhere. And people used to say, "How do you know these things?" And she'd say, I read.
Did she tell you what they did?
No, we were just told we weren't to do this or we weren't to go there. I don't think we were conscious of it at that time, but we know now. It's very hard to sort out what you always knew and what you found out later.
Yeah. So what sort of a kid were you?
Oh, very quiet. Wouldn't say boo to a goose.
Really? Was it hard surviving up there being like that?
I suppose, in a way, we didn't have a lot of friends because we moved around a lot. And also we were told we had to come straight home from school and stay in our own place. So we didn't mix a lot. And I think that was very restrictive. I mean, we could have our school friends home after school, but then they also had to go home. Children weren't allowed to roam around the way they do now, and most of them had quite a long walk back and forth to school. We used to walk into town to the library, change our library books, the municipal library in the Queen Victoria building.
You know what? Well, where did you live, and what sort of accommodation did you have?
Well, sometimes we lived in a balcony room with, cooking facilities on the balcony, something like that. But they were those beautiful terrace homes. The rooms were so big. And
how many rooms would you have?
Well, sometimes we had one, sometimes we had two, depending on what Mother earned. If she couldn't afford to pay the rent, she moved into something smaller. If she had a good, steady job, we'd get into something bigger. In Roslyn Street we had a nice little, but it was still only what was termed as a bachelor flat. And my mother used to always laugh about this bachelor flat that we lived in because it had a double bed in it. And it always amused my mother because the double bed folded up into a cupboard, you see, and it was just the one, like we had the one room and the kitchenette and a bathroom and a balcony and a little closed-in balcony. But there was only the one main room. It was very self-contained. There was only the three of us, see. But
did most kids from the area live in?
A lot of them lived. A lot of my school friends lived at Paddington area, but most of them lived similar. Some of them, their parents were caretakers in blocks of flats, where that meant they got a good flat to live in. A lot of them lived in just balcony rooms. I must remember it was Depression days.
What did your mother work as?
She was a midday waitress at that time because she could do midday. She saw us off to school and then she was home. She was either home when we got home or she was home soon after. But she did a lot of different things. People wanted her to wait on a dinner or something like that. She did cleaning. She did anything that she could get.
So was she in and out of work a lot?
Oh yes, yes. She didn't always have permanent work, but she was always working. See, women in those days would do anything. She travelled up to the North Shore once. Somebody was advertising. They were building houses, and they wanted somebody to scrub these new houses out. She went with a bucket and mops and everything, and travelled up to the North Shore, Linfield I think it was, and scrubbed out these houses. You got about 2 and 6 a house or something, but she did such a fantastic job they gave her extra.
Gosh, and in those days...
people wouldn't move 5 yards to do a job today because they get paid to stay home.
Yeah. But in those days she would have been on the female wage, which was like 60% or...
Oh yes, they only got a very low wage.
Was she able to get food relief during the...
No, she never had any relief whatsoever.
Didn't have to go to the St Vincent's de Paul?
Never, ever.
You must have had some pretty stark times.
I don't ever remember going hungry.
Well, what would be a typical meal then?
Well, she'd make meals out of mince. She'd buy chops, neck chops, and make soups. She always made very tasty food. And she was a good cook. She made do. And see, it was such a different life to what it is now. You only had what you could afford. If you couldn't afford it, you didn't have it.
Mm.
You know?
Mm. And so we say with clothes, did you have...
She made all our clothes.
Gee.
She was a good sewer.
And did you have a couple of outfits, or...?
You had a good outfit. You had your school uniform, or whatever you were. We always had a uniform to wear to school. And something for best on Sunday. And that was it, mostly.
And then would you have another one outfit for around the house or for playing in Saturday?
Oh yes, you'd probably have something, to change into something when you came home, some of your old clothes. But she made everything that we wore, our uniforms and everything.
And were you the eldest?
No, I was the youngest. My sister was 5 years older than me. I was spoiled.
Gee.
My sister was the one who had the responsibility of looking after me and seeing that the tea was started and things like this, you know. I suppose I was very spoiled. Didn't have to do much.
So your mother was a single mother?
Yes.
Separate?
Well, from the year after my parents separated, from the time I was 5, she worked and kept us.
And what was the family's reaction to that?
Oh, they all wanted her to go back to South Australia. That was the main cry. Come home, come home. No, she said no, she'd battle on. So they, both the families, my father's people and my mother's people, were all South Australians. And I suppose they had the wanderlust or something. My mother was always working, like before she married, she was always working away in the country somewhere. She was mad to travel. Maybe that was why we moved. I could never make out why we moved so often. And we didn't do moonlight flits as most people seem to think we did. People used to say if you moved out of a place after you had only been there a short time that you did a moonlight flit, you didn't pay the rent. But we didn't do that.
You would be mostly going to furnished rooms, wouldn't you?
Oh, no. We always had our own furniture. Always had our own things.
God, it must have been quite hard to organise.
Well, she must have been a pretty good organiser because she'd go out and find somewhere else to live. She'd go back, she'd get the curtains, get a van. You didn't have a big Pantechnicon or anything like that, you know, to move you. You had a little old cart or something. And when we'd get home, she'd have the curtains up and you know, she'd cut them up if they didn't fit and sew them up, and the machine always went with us. There was always the machine.
The sewing machine?
Sewing machine. There it is in the corner, still.
What about religion? Was religion a factor in your household?
Oh, yes, we always went to church.
What denomination?
Catholic. We went to, that's where we started off at, well actually we started off at boarding school up at Parramatta. She put us into boarding school. She didn't know what to do when she was left on her own, and so she put us into boarding school, and I was a bit young for boarding school, and they advised her to take us out. So that was the Catholic college up there, and then that's when we went to the Cross to live, and we went to St Canis's.
Did she get any support from the church community?
No, everybody seemed to think she could. Sorry about that. Everybody seemed to think that she could help everybody else.
Really?
Anything that we had finished with, everybody else was ready to snap up when we'd finished with our school uniforms. Somebody else was always waiting to get them.
Would she have got fee relief, do you think? Or?
No, we didn't get any relief. She was very independent, stand on her own feet.
And was she active? Was she a practising Catholic?
Yes.
So you went to Mass on Sundays?
Yes. Got my communion photo in there, we raked out the other day. But after my sister finished school, I don't know really why she changed me from the Catholic school to the public school. That was when my sister finished school, and we made our confirmation, and then I went to Darlinghurst Public. I think she thought I wasn't getting on well enough there, that I had more potential.
Were you at the school? Was there any disgrace associated with you not having a father around?
No, that wasn't. I think we were better off than most of the families because so many of them were out of work, and it was really bad times.
Well, wouldn't a lot of the men have gone off to the country on the Wallaby sort of
Some
thing?
of the men did, yes. Some of the men did. But a big percentage of them were on the dole.
But would your situation have been unusual at that time?
No, not particularly.
No,
I don't think so. There were a lot of families, who were struggling with one one parent. I think it was the fact that divorce wasn't accepted in those days. You know, that was the main thing.
And if you were going to describe your mother, what would you say?
What would I say? Oh, it's a bit hard to describe. She was tall. She looked like me. I looked like her. And she was just a very forthright person. She knew what she wanted to do. She made up her mind. Now, I don't, but my mother made up her mind very quickly. She'd decide to do something and she'd do it now. Never sat down. She was brought up to not sit idle. And I don't think after she was left to look after us, I don't think she ever had any idle moments. She was always very busy.
Was she happy?
Very happy person. A lot of sadness in her life, but essentially a happy person. She still sang around the house, and we had, in later years, one of my aunties was over here, an older sister than my mother, and they were both out in the kitchen. Mum was singing away, and Anne it was, she said, "Oh, Laura," she said, "you still sing." And she remembered, you know, from the little girl she was always singing, and never had any tuition because they didn't hear any music. They were in the country, out in the country, so they never had anything to sort of go by. But she just always sang her own little tunes, and yeah, she was a happy person.
Despite all the hardship?
Yes, despite, you know, she didn't have an easy life at all. It was all sort of work. But she was happy working.
Was she ever involved in any unions or
No.
industrial?
No, never, ever.
And who would she have voted for? Labor or?
Oh, no, Liberal, I would say. Always Liberal. She was as good as anybody else and better than most. Although that's her saying.
Okay. Well, what sort of discipline did she use?
Just we were told not to do something, we mostly didn't do it. Occasionally we didn't go somewhere that we'd been going because we hadn't done what we were supposed to do, so we didn't get to go. But I don't think she ever had to chastise us that much.
Did you understand?
I don't think we were angels by any means. But I think we understood that life wasn't easy for her, and tried not to make it any more difficult than it was.
You were aware of the sort of...
We were aware of the situation, yes. But I wish we'd been more aware of it, really. You know, it's only in later life that you realise, you know, how hard a person works to look after you, care for you. No, we never felt deprived. Never ever felt deprived. Always had ambitions, you know, to have more than we had, but we didn't feel deprived in what we did have.
Were you expected to contribute to the family? Did you have like any jobs or sell newspapers or?
No.
Well,
we might have sold, if we had any bottles, we'd sell the bottles or the papers to the paper. We had bottle-os came around, and you'd go out and sell your bottles to them if we had any, or papers to the bottle-os, but we didn't go out anywhere else. We didn't do paper runs. Little girls didn't do things like that.
Did you collect bottles?
We didn't go out and collect them, only what we had ourselves.
Did you have jobs at home that you had to do to help?
Oh yes, when we came from school we were told what we had to do, and Faith usually had to get the veg, you know, we might have to go to the shops and get some things, or we had to prepare the vegetables or things, depending on what Mum was doing, you see, what jobs she was doing at the time and what time she was getting home.
And were the shops local, were they?
Oh yes, so at the Cross there were plenty of shops everywhere. on the same block almost.
So you'd just walk to the shops and come back with a
Yes.
few things?
Yes, that's right.
You wouldn't do these enormous weekly shops that people do these days?
We wouldn't be buying that much. Be buying I can remember walking up the street when I was very small, and I'd been given a list of things to get, and I couldn't remember whether it was rhubarb or barb-rube. That's how small I was. And I was walking up the street saying, rhubarb, barb-rube, rhubarb, barb-rube. And by the time I got up to Lopez's on the corner, it was a fruit shop on the corner of Roslyn Street and Darlinghurst Road. And I didn't know whether when I got there I'd have the right name or not. But they were lovely people. I was pretty small then.
Well, what did the family, did you do anything for fun or together?
Well, we didn't do a lot with Mum because she was always, like, on our time off, Mum didn't mind us going out, but she always wanted to rest. On Sunday, that was her rest day, and she needed it. And no, we used to walk around, we used to go down to Rushcutters Bay a lot, and Jensen's tennis courts were there. We used to go and watch the tennis, and we went swimming at Rushcutters Bay. Baths, which aren't there anymore. It was down where the yacht club is now. We mostly walked. We walked to the gardens a lot.
Botanical Gardens?
Botanical Gardens, we walked there. That was nothing, you know, it was just down the road.
And you could spend the day there?
Oh, when we were very small, I don't think we were allowed to go out that much on our own, but so Faith was older. Once she was, she was 10, so once she was old enough to look after me. So that was why I was always being looked after.
Well, when you were 10, when you were 10, she would have been 15.
Yes, well, she was left school then. And she went to business college, which was really a disaster because by the time she came out of business college, she was too old to take a junior's job. And she had no experience, so you couldn't get work. She was in a much worse position than I was because when I finished, it was sort of, the depression part was over, it was improving then, and I went straight out of school into a job. No trouble at all. Faith was out of work for a long time. She used to knit. She used to knit beautiful lacy jumpers for 7 and 6. She worked like a slave. She saw this ad in the paper one day for knitters, and she said to Mum, I think I'll go and apply for that. And Mum said, well, you've got to hide. She said, you're not a knitter. She said, I've knitted a jumper. So away she went, and she got the job that this woman used to give her. She was a beautiful knitter. This woman used to give her all the difficult things that people had brought back, you know, that they couldn't do the pattern, and so she'd give them to Faith to untangle. So anyway, one day she went, I think she was only getting 5 shillings for them then, lacy jumpers, and she'd had an awful lot of trouble with this one. So she said, I think that's worth 7 and 6. So she gave her the 7 and 6. She had plenty of go in it.
Was that in the mid-30s that Faith had that experience?
Yes, this would be when she was about 16.
And how long would it take her to knit a jumper? And she'd get this 7 and 6 or 5 shillings?
Oh, she probably a couple of weeks, a week or something. I can't really remember how long it took her to do it. But see, she wasn't doing anything else. And as she said, she may as well be doing that. But it was real slave labour. Still, it was better than nothing.
And did you ever hear your mother and your sister talking about, or what caused the depression, or? Surely.
No, I don't think so.
They didn't blame the government or the, or?
No, I don't really ever remember her. She accepted things more. No, she wasn't a complainer.
Didn't go and join the unemployed workers movement?
Oh,
Or
no.
what did you know about them?
I didn't know anything at all about them at the time, but I don't even know anything about them much now, except that I don't go for these rallies and things and women's libs and all these things. I think if you want to do something, you get out and do it. I'm not a unionist.
Were you ever faced with eviction?
No. Now, as I said, if Mum couldn't afford the rent, she up and got something cheaper, even if it was just one little room. She always had to have that money for the rent, had to have your roof over your head. We had a nice home in Bondi before we went to the Cross.
Was that a rented home?
Mum, they were buying it at the time. They were, she was paying it off. And I could never understand really why she gave that up. I think that she should have, I think she should have stayed there, but she didn't want to.
Did she get a half of the equity in it, or did she get any money out of it?
No.
So she left
No,
with
her
nothing?
her family helped her to start with a bit.
You know how you said you went out with your sister? How far did you roam?
Oh, only around like Elizabeth Bay. See, Elizabeth Bay beach was open in those days. There's a wharf there now that belongs to the Navy and it's closed off. But we could get down on that beach in front of Boomerang. You've heard of Boomerang? And it was a lovely little beach, beautiful little shells, sort of iridescent shells like pearl. And we were always collecting shells on the beach and things like that. Very simple things. We were lucky if we got to the pictures on a Saturday afternoon. That was a special treat.
Where did you go?
To King's Cross pictures show.
What can you remember about that there?
Oh, Crazy Cat and, and the cereals and, we had horror films where things walls used to come in and just about squash you and things like this. And just to get your fare in and penny to spend or something.
I heard that those picture shows up at King's Cross were quite wild, kids throwing things and they used to give you comics.
Yell and yes, used to have a comic. Oh, the kids were just noisy like kids were.
There was a big event Saturday afternoon.
Oh,
all the
Saturday
kids.
was all children. Yes.
No adult never.
Adults wouldn't want to go near the place any more than they do today. But there was no violence. It was just fun.
Can you remember any local characters?
No, I don't think so. Not really.
Were there people that you had to avoid?
Not that I can remember.
Were there anybody that if you were in trouble that you were told to go to? Like if your mother never turned up or...
No.
You
I didn't have things like that in those days. You just looked after your own people, your own children. I suppose we had friends and we would know that if something happened we'd go to one of our friends' places. I suppose it was just instinct. But I don't ever remember being told, do this or do that sort of thing. The main thing, we were told to stay inside our own home when we came from school. I mean, we didn't go roaming off after school. We always came home. But these walks and everything would be at the weekend when we were allowed to go out walking.
And what would you do in the evening? They didn't have TV or anything, so in the evening, did you have your main meal in the evening?
Yes.
And so after dinner, what would you do?
Well, in the summertime, as I said, we mostly went out for a walk because it was hot. You didn't have all these coolers and everything like that, and you were mostly hot in your own apartments. And everybody would sort of go strolling down the streets and look in the shop windows and maybe see your friends, passers by and things. And then you'd come home and you'd be cool. We played cards at home. We had games and things that we played. Ludo, snakes and ladders and all those things.
And who were your friends?
Well, mostly our school friends, or a couple of friends of Mother's. she, work friends that she had, and sometimes they'd come around. But,
and what was the situation of some of your friends? Like, where did their parents work?
Well, one of them, they were caretakers at one of the flats down in Springfield Avenue, or just off there somewhere. So they were caretakers. They didn't have to go out to work. That's how that was their living. They got their rent free, and that's what they lived on. There was a big vacant block down at the back of Springfield Avenue there. I think it's Neats Avenue, if I remember rightly. It had been an old theatre, and there was a stage there, and then the rest of the place was just this great paddock. We used to go down there and play cricket. And I suppose they were just our school friends. And Gladdy lived down there. Not that Gladdy, another Gladdy. And a lot of them lived over Paddington Way, so they had a long way to walk.
And why did they go to school at St Canis's?
Well, that would have been the nearest Catholic school for them. It would be halfway between there and the Paddington schools.
Right. And were there many kids living in King's Cross?
Oh yes, yes. I think there were a lot of children there in those days.
Yes. Can't find any of them now. Very few.
I've thought of a few. I'll talk to you about it later.
Did your mother like her employment?
I don't think she minded. When she was working, doing domestic work, she still chose what she wanted to do, who she wanted to work for. She was terribly independent. If she didn't like the people, she wouldn't work for them. She'd say there's always somebody else to work for.
Even in the Depression, she said?
Even in the Depression. And that was where she got that saying, I'm as good as anybody and better than most. And she was certainly better than a lot of the people who would have employed her. And she just wouldn't work for them. And she got on very well with the people she worked for. They all thought the world of her. And I can't mention names, but she worked for some very well-known people who had a big Alsatian dog. And if the lady of the house was going out at night, she didn't like to leave the dog on its own. So Mother would go over and babysit the dog. And she could just sit in the lounge and read for the evening. And now that's the kind of people she worked for, and some of them she worked very hard for, but I mean these were some of the sort of the little choice bits that she got a little bit of amusement out of that, and pleasure, because she could read their beautiful books. And there were quite a few jobs that she did like that, where she was very well thought of. And she babysit the children,
And your sister would look after you?
Yes, well that was it. So she went out to do that. My sister was there for me.
Well, if you wanted to describe the King's Cross neighbourhood, how would you describe it? You've talked about it being bohemian and residential and then commercial too, isn't it? It was a whole mixture.
Yes, it was. It was very alive.
Can you name some of the shops?
The top of the cross. It's a bit. Well, I've mentioned Harry's stall, and I mentioned Lopez's fruit shop that was on the corner, and they were related. Harry and Mrs. Lopez were brother and sister. I can't really think of any of the people.
When you say it was very alive, Is it been like, did people come from Sydney to go out at the cross, to go to the coffee shops?
Yes, people came. You went to the theatre in town, not us, but other people. They'd come up to the cross for supper. You always went to supper if you went to the theatre at night. You always went to supper afterwards. You wouldn't think of going home without.
What smells can you remember?
Mainly the fruit shops, which I mentioned before.
And when you think back of the cross, what's the sight or the image that comes into your mind?
Trees, the lovely trees, tree-lined streets.
And could you say that there was a main business or industry there at that time?
No, there was no industry there. It was mainly residential, and the shops to accommodate the people, food shops mainly.
So the shops were for the locals?
Yes, definitely locals.
But then they had some pretty exclusive sort of dress and shops, didn't they?
Yes, there were very, very lovely dress shops. Some good restaurants.
And locals would shop there, and that was there?
Yes, I'd say it was mostly local shops. I think the people who came to the cross just to visit mostly came just to look because it was talked about, just to see the cross. And it was always hustle bustle.
It wasn't too expensive, it wasn't tourist oriented even at that time?
No, definitely not. See, people could go to we had a delicatessen next door, and you could go and buy a quarter of a pound of butter. So that's how people bought their food. And you say, we didn't come back with all these parcels. We came back with a little parcel like that. Because people didn't have refrigerators. We had nice chests, but a lot of people didn't. They'd have a butter cooler for their butter. And they bought from meal to meal, because there was not the facilities for keeping food in your rooms.
And who would deliver the ice for the ice chest?
Oh, the iceman came with his big block of ice and the pick and put it in your
He'd break
ice
it up
chest.
for your size?
Yes, they were made the size for the ice block, for the ice chest.
And how often would you have to get a block of ice?
Oh, probably once a week, I think they used to come. The ice lasted a fair bit. The chest, like for the part for the ice, was about that big. That was the size of the block. It just fitted in, and that would last. I think it would last for about a week. I can't really remember. It seems to be when they used to come.
Yeah. And were there other deliveries?
No, we didn't get anything else delivered. I think there were deliveries, but we didn't need the deliveries.
And were most of the people in the area, was it a poor area or was it an affluent area?
Very mixed. Very, very wealthy and very, very poor. There were beautiful flats there. As you mentioned, that one that's up for sale now, that there were a lot of those very wealthy flats, and they're huge. Some of them are beautiful. And so you had the very wealthy, you had artistic people, a lot of actresses, actors.
Do you know any? Can you name any?
Theatrical. I can't really.
But as locals you just knew them?
We knew that they lived there, but you didn't mix. People didn't mix with other people. They didn't interfere. This is what I'm saying. Everybody was very self-contained. And you might know that people lived there, but you wouldn't go and make yourself known to them because they were celebrities or anything. So, well, that was much later. They had that theatre down at Minerva, but that was years later.
So we've talked about the games you played with your friends, didn't
Yes.
we? Cricket. What was your school life like at St. Canice's?
Very quiet.
Yes. What can you remember anything? When you
No,
think
just playing chasings in the yard and things like that. Loved my school teacher. We had a beautiful teacher there.
Who was that?
Sister Gabriel, I think she was. She came from St Vincent's. And she was a lovely teacher.
And how were the lessons set up in those days?
Oh, I wish I had some of the books.
Mm.
I don't think we did. We learnt things thoroughly, but we didn't have a lot of lessons. I can't really remember having a lot of school books or anything there. It was mostly concentrated on your writing and reading.
Mm. And when you went to Darlinghurst Public School, was that for your high school years?
No, I think it was only 4th year I started there.
And what was that like?
That was hard, changing from a Catholic school to a public school, because they had different subjects that we hadn't done. They did weather. I can't remember what they called it now, but you learned all about the clouds and things like that, which had never touched before. So I was sort of one subject behind, and that was hard catching up. But once I got out of that class, I never seemed to worry about this. I just plodded along with lessons. I always seemed to pass the exams with skin on my teeth or something.
Was there any sort of Catholic, sectarian sort of rivalry, between the kids in the Catholic and state schools?
Oh, when I went to the Catholic school, I suppose there were. They were only saying, some of the non-Catholics were only saying some of the things, we used to shout at each other. But I can't ever remember doing it, really.
And what sort of things could be shouted?
I can't remember. I'm not much used to you
That's
there.
All right. Can you remember any chants and rhymes of the playground?
No.
No.
I'm a bit of a dead loss as far as school's concerned.
Well, what was the most looked forward to time of year?
Oh, I suppose Christmas was.
And were there always presents?
Oh, yes, yes.
Did you believe in Santa?
Oh, of course I believed in Santa. When Mother thought that we'd, too old for toys, she bought us beautiful velvet dolls with long legs. They had little velvet bodies and the heads and long legs, and she thought it'd be nice for us to have to sit on our beds. And of course some dear little girl we knew who used to come and play with me, she was a lot younger than I was, she decided to bath them. So we didn't have our beautiful dolls anymore. She wasn't very popular with any of us.
Been a tragedy.
It was a tragedy, yes.
Mm.
I still have my baby doll though. She's just sitting on my bed.
At school, going back to school, how did the teachers treat you? Was it tough discipline or was it pretty easy?
Depended on the teachers. Some of them were more strict. The head teacher there was fairly strict.
Which school are we talking about?
At St Canis's. She was fairly strict, but my teacher was gorgeous. We'd never do anything to upset her because we liked her so much.
And were all the staff nuns?
Yes, yes.
And were you happy there?
Yes, yes, I was very happy there.
Did you go on holidays?
No holidays. The first holiday we went on, one of my aunties came over from South Australia and took us to Katoomba for a week, and that was the first holiday I can remember, which was lovely.
Mm. Well, what did you do over the Christmas breaks from school?
Oh, I just played.
Botanical gardens and...
Yes, yes, just walked.
And you felt happy and comfortable and safe there?
That's why I say we didn't feel deprived. It was just our life.
And your mother was sort of happy for you to wander sort of the streets there, like in the holidays? Were you free or did you have to stay home?
We were restricted you know, if she said we could go, we could go. If we wanted to go somewhere, we had to ask permission. We couldn't just go off. She always had to know where we were, and we had to be home at certain times. There's none of this. I can remember we were late home once. We did get into trouble for that. I think we were restricted from just about everything for a couple of weeks because we were late. Now she was very flexible, very understanding, but if she said we couldn't do anything, we couldn't do it, and that was that.
Did you ever have any adventures when you were wandering around the cross?
Oh, well, we loved going to Elizabeth Bay House. We used to go down there a lot, and had huge gardens there. The kitchen building was still there at that time, and the caretaker, I think he lived in the kitchen cottage, and he used to take us through the place, and because he told us that he took us down in the dungeons, and it said that was where the convicts, you know, were chained up down there, and we believed him. According to all the books, the history books, they say that Macleay didn't have any slaves there. Convicts. But we think he did. Because the dungeons all had, they say now that they were used for storerooms, but they all had benches along either side and the iron rings in them. So I can't see why they would have wanted iron rings to chain up the stores. I think the stores would have been over in the kitchen section. Probably.
And was the Elizabeth Bay House in good condition in those years?
No, it was fairly derelict then. And
were you allowed? What was the gardens like? Were you free to play in there?
Yes, there were magnificent magnolia trees. The big white magnolia, and all nasturtiums underneath it. Where it is now, it just has that roadway through it, but where all those blocks of flats on the left-hand side, that was all garden. Originally, it went right up to Macleay Street, but gradually the flats were built down until there was nothing left. I thought we could have wept when that roadway went, when they took all the land. It's quite, the garden in front of the house is very lovely now, but so that used to go almost down to the, it went to Billiard Avenue and up to Macleay Street. There was vast land, and we walked around because we used to dream about, owning all these beautiful homes, and we'd go along and we'd buy this one and that one, and in our imagination. So that was where we got our pleasure from.
And anywhere else that you used to go?
Oh, I suppose we used to go to Bondi to swim. If we went swimming, we'd go to Bondi. Or I don't think we went there until later in our life, like not when we were living at the Cross, to Neilson Park. We used to go a lot. The trams all went, you were saying the atmosphere of the Cross, so the trams and buses and everything went through there. It was such a busy intersection. It was on the way to Watson's Bay. That's where we used to go out to Watson's Bay on the tram. Neilson Park.
What, and swim there?
Swimming.
And why did you leave? What year did you leave the Cross? Did you say 36?
Yes, about 36.
And why did your family leave?
Don't ask me.
And where did you go to?
We went to Bondi at that time. We went out to Bondi for a while. Maybe Mum was hankering to go back there because we went back to the same street we used to live in. And we didn't stay out there very long, and then we went up to Waverton. We were up there for a little while. So we moved around. Quite a lot.
Okay. Is there anything you wanted to say? Anything I haven't asked?
I don't think so, but I seem to have been doing most of the talking. I don't think I've answered your questions very well.
Oh, you have? No, it's been good, very articulate. I'm just trying to ask. Were there any favourite songs? I'm just trying to think what I haven't asked. I'm at the bottom of the barrel at the moment.
Yes, I wish I could remember the songs, because that was another thing. There was a lot of community singing. At the theatre you used to have community singing. And
What would that be? People would pay to go?
yes, you'd pay to go, and they'd have the words up on the screen and the little ball popping along, and everybody would sing along.
And you'd be sitting in cinema seats?
Yes, cinema seats. And
They have an organist?
Happy Days Are Here Again, and sort of, they were Depression Day songs. Everything was gay and bright. There was enough gloom and doom, and the music was bright and gay. And
would they have an organist there sort of bouncing?
Yes, all the theatres had organs. The Wurlitzer organs.
Yeah.
When you went to the theatre, you had 2 pictures, 2 films, but you had music, and like the big theatres all had bands, big bands. Most, a lot of people went for the band, not mainly the band, not the film that was on.
And when did that change? Was it when talkies came in?
I think it was when they started pulling down all the theatres. They've pulled them all down. Do you know, in the very early days, before I can remember, we had more theatres in Sydney than some of the big cities, in other countries. It was a very theatrical atmosphere in Sydney. The only, saying could I remember anybody, I remember one lady, she was a school teacher. She didn't teach at my school, but she lived in the same residential that we were living in at the time, and she was a Miss MacDonald. And when she moved from there, and she went down to the bottom of Macleay Street to a building, there were 2 buildings, Agincourt and Cressy, and they were sort of off Macleay Street. There were a lot of, I suppose that had sort of been a progress from where people had bigger properties, and they'd built these, they called them drives, I think, mostly, and there'd be 2 or 3 blocks in there, and they were very tall, narrow, tall buildings. I think they were about 5 stories high, which was very tall for then, but they were on very small blocks of land. And she moved down there, and she asked me to go down for morning tea or afternoon tea one day. She was an art teacher, and she was apparently very taken with me. I was a dear little thing.
Okay, look, thank you very much.
Well, I don't feel as though I've answered many of your questions.
No, it's good.
It's been lovely talking to you.
Okay.
I